Welcome, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Thank you. So, right now, before I go anywhere else, I have to tell you that I made a mistake yesterday in class. And there's this great warning in Pirkei Avot about scholars being heedful of their words, lest they take their students to a place, which is basically barren and where there's no water and stuff like that. I'm so grateful that for whatever reason it was, I reviewed what I had done yesterday, at least one of the parts, and realized that I had had the wrong impression and had, in some senses, misunderstood what the Torah T'mimah was saying. All right? So we're going to go back over something that we did yesterday. Just it's not a long deal, but it's just the opposite, it's the reverse of what I thought it was, right? So here we go. Himol yimol, mikan li Yisrael arel shelo yimol. Right. So from here, it is an Israelite who is uncircumcised that he should not perform circumcisions on others. Right. And I know that I said at the time that it came to include someone who wasn't circumcised on account of the fact that his brothers had died as a result of circumcision, or he was so weak physically that he couldn't have his circumcision, etc., etc. I said that. That is not exactly not the case. So and by the way, I did a little bit more research, etc., in terms of the references he said. So, all right, okay. Let's just take a look inside, as they say, to the Torah T'mimah in all fairness, to the Torah T'mimah and in fairness to you. Zayit Ba'er Gamkin, right? This becomes clarified also, al pi hadrasha, right, regarding a previous interpretation we'd had, the mishahu mal hu yimo, where it says one who is circumcised. There it says it positively, that one who is circumcised is one who can perform circumcision, kemevu ar lamala, as was clarified above. For ire, right? So now he's saying I believe, this particular drush here, that if he's not circumcised, he shouldn't perform circumcision. Yisrael arer she'eno mal mechamat shev mafir brit. That this particular law is dealing in a case of an Israelite who who did not performed the circumcision on himself, right? Who did not become circumcised, mechamat shemefir brit, on account of the fact that he is intending to profane the whole mitzvah itself. In other words, he's not performing it because ain't no one going to tell him what to do, right? Aval, however, she'eino mal mechamat shemetu achiv, but one who was not circumcised because his brothers died, mechamat milah, on account of their being when they were circumcised, and they died. Or another case, shelo nitchazka briutav, that he never became healthy enough. Ad shesakanahu lo limol. In other words, he was so unhealthy that it would have been dangerous to perform the circumcision. Hahu mutar limol. Such a person is in fact permitted to perform circumcisions. Now that's not what I said yesterday, but I am clarifying it today. And for whatever the reason was, the first time I went around this, I misunderstood it. And the reason is tekevan dema'ones enomimol, precisely because he was forced. The reason he's not circumcised is because of the situation. He was forced not to be circumcised, and so consequently we consider him as if he is circumcised. That was his intention. It's precisely the opposite of what I said in yesterday's lesson, and of course it's recorded. You can see what I said there, okay? So just the opposite. And I think that actually sits a lot better. And not only that, but it's a great principle in terms of what are your intentions. Intentions are so important, right? And if your intentions are sincere, but you're not able to actually perform what you had intended to perform, very often the halachah Jewish law considers you to have performed it. V'yein b'Bavli, he's giving you the reference in the Babylonian Talmud, Avodah Zarah Kaf Zayin, in Avodah Zarah page 27a. And this I did look up, Yoreh Deah. I did look up in the Yoreh Deah, Siman Reish Samach Daled, that was chapter 264, Seif Aleph, the first paragraph, where it says it quite explicitly. And it's very interesting. I read a little bit of the additional commentaries on the Yoreh Deah there, and basically one of the commentators said, that if later on in his life, right, so for example, the person who wasn't healthy enough as a baby to get circumcised, right, but if later on he was healthy enough and chose not to get circumcised, then the situation becomes reversed, and he can no longer, he's considered not to be able to perform circumcisions. There may have been some other considerations as well, which just escaped me for the moment. But I did want to clarify that. I thought it was very important. I felt, of course, terrible that I had misled all of you. And I hope I do that never, but certainly as seldom as possible. But it wasn't my intention to mislead you, so perhaps there's some mercy there. And I think it's also just shows you how important it is to go over these things, and how a second reading sometimes just really, helps you with that first reading. That first impressions aren't always good. All right. Unless anybody wants to comment, I am happy to go on to where we left off. All right. Okay, Basar Orlato, right? The flesh of his foreskin. Tanya, right? There's a teaching. This is going to sound familiar. Minayin lemila shebe'oto makom, right? We had this question coming up before, but now we're going to have it in a different drush, right? So how do we know that circumcision is performed? Literally, it says in that place. It's a euphemism, right? Just saying that place, the place we know it's performed, right? Don't want to say it explicitly, but there it is. Amar Rabbi Yoshaya, said Rabbi Yoshaya, Ne'emar kan orlato. So here we have this word orlato in the verse that we just read. Ve'namar lahalan, and later on in Parshat Kedoshim, in the book of Leviticus, in the Torah portion called Kedoshim, it uses a similar word, va'araltem orlato et piryo, right? You shall, here in this case, it means you shall, in a sense, remove its orla, right? This orla is some kind of barrier, right? Barrier. Et piryo, right? It's fruit. It has to do with the fact that the third year that a tree produces, or the first 3 years that a tree produces fruit, and hopefully I am not misleading you here, but that you don't eat the fruit. And that's a law called orla, the same word, right? So, but here it has to do with fruit, a fruit tree, and it uses this term. And here we are, okay, I'm going to finish this up, and then I'm going to just let you know, this is a logical application, we'll see. It's one of the rules of interpretation. So, ma lahalan davar she'oseh pri. Just in the case there, meaning, right, in the case of the fruit tree, we're talking about something that creates fruit. Afkan davar she'oseh pri. Here too, in the case of the Milah that we're talking about, or the Brit, right, we are talking about something which creates fruit. In other words, the same thing that creates fruit. And this is called a gzeira shava. This is an example of a hermeneutic principle called gzeira shava, where a specific word that's used in one context is applied where the same word is used, or a very similar word is used in another totally different context. And the question is, what does the one shed light on? And we are saying that where in Leviticus, it's very clear, it's talking about fruit trees, right? And it uses this term orla. That here, where we use the term orla, we're talking about something that has to do with providing fruit. It's a beautiful, beautiful example of a gzeira shava. I would tell you that there is an important element to the gzeira shava, meaning and that is that one cannot come up with your own Gzera Shava. You use a Gzera Shava that you have learned. In other words, it is something that has to be developed through tradition. So here we are. We just learned this tradition of this particular Gzera Shava, and the other piece that you need to know is that if a law is learned out by one of these principles, it is a Torah law. It's a deoraita. It's not a derabanan. It has the full force of Torah law. So, performing the circumcision on the baby boy, where the circumcision is performed, that is the removal of the foreskin, that's how we know it's done there. Very different proof, but an interesting one. Let's take a look at Torah T'mimah. Yen masha katuv la'el. He gives you the reference to the previous time we looked at it. This is his note, Otmem, that is his footnote 40. We're on footnote 43 here, right? V'tzaref lakan, and you can add it to what's going on here. You can apply it to what's going on here. Umefaresh beGemara, and in the Gemara, in the Talmud, it's clarified. Afal pi dematzinu sham orla, right? That there it says the Gemara is very rigorous for the most, and it really is. It has a high level of rigor. So it says, despite the fact, afal pi, despite the fact, dematzinu sham shem orla, that we do find this term orla od be'ezu evarim, we do find it regarding other limbs, other parts of the body. Ukemoshe katuv, we said, ba'otaniskar, and back there in footnote 40, we mentioned this, right? It mentions the orlat sfatayim. It talks about the orla of your lips, or orlat halev. It says, your heart. Remember, we talked about that, right? Achalashon orlato, right? But when we're talking about orlato bekinui, now that's this word, I really struggle to, I'm familiar with this word kinui, and sometimes I think of it as meaning, and it's not an adjective here, right? I don't think, right? I mean, it's a noun, orlato, but somehow he's saying that when it says his orla, and I think that's what he's referring to. Lo nimsa, the only place where you find this term orlato, and I think here it must mean as in this possessive kind of way, right? I think, right? So I'm here, trying to figure out, but I think what he's saying is that you will not find this term orlato, right? Lo nimsa, you don't find this. It's not anywhere else. Zulat kan, right? Except here, the inyan netiah, where it's referring to the planting. It's talking about the fruit trees, right? So that's all he has to say about it. But he's saying, to what degree this is a consistent proof, and why dafka, even though you might say, well, it's other parts of the body, etc. We see that we're talking about specifically the part of because it's only regarding to fruit-bearing trees. It doesn't refer to other kinds of trees. So we're looking at the fruit-bearing part of the human being. That's the way this is working. All right? Going on. Basar orlato, right? The flesh of his foreskin. Mikan, from here, dehechi de lo mahale avuha, that in the case of someone whose father does not make sure he's circumcised, uvedina, right? And I think it means, and the court. The court is also, the Beit Din is also responsible to make sure that little Jewish boys are circumcised. Mechayev ihu, he himself is obligated lememahel nafshe, to make sure that he circumcises himself. So even though the responsibility falls first on the father and certainly ultimately on the court, if they fail to do so, you still have the obligation to make sure that you are circumcised, that the male person is circumcised. Why do we know this? Dichtiv, because it says, Va'arel zachar asher lo yimol, and that is to say, any uncircumcised male who did not, elo yimol epizar olato, right, who did not circumcise the flesh of his foreskin, v'nichrata, he shall be cut off. Okay, so this is in Tractate Kiddushin, page 29a. Let's take a look. All right. V'chiyuv atzmo, right? And so by looking at all what that's going on here, we see that his own personal obligation, in other words, the fact that to be circumcised ultimately falls on oneself. These others, your father, the court, the Jewish court, they all have this chiyuv, right? They have this obligation. Od gadol, right? The fact is the personal obligation is greater, od gadol mechiyuv ha'av v'habeitin. It is greater than the obligation of the father or the court. She'im lo nimol. So this is kind of the way this is working. Lo nimol, because if he is not if he is uncircumcised, bigadluto, as an adult, if he still remains uncircumcised, yesh alav chiyuv karet. Such a person now has the fact that of excision, of being cut off. That is not the case. Ha'av v'habeitin. The father does not have to face that punishment or that consequence, and the court does not have to face that consequence if they fail to do that. Ein bahem rak chiyuv aseh. They have the obligation of a positive mitzvah. It's not like they're totally off the hook, but the punishment isn't anything like karet. Ya'an, why? The honest, I think is honest karet, kativ rak bo b'atzmo, because onesh, karet, kativ rak bo b'atzmo, because this punishment, this consequence of karet, of excision, is written only with him himself. The pasuk zeh in this particular verse. Okay, going on. V'dat HaRambam, and the opinion of Maimonides, right? Beperek Aleph, in chapter 1, I think halachah bet, so his Mishneh Torah, we're referring to this encyclopedic work of Maimonides on Jewish law, on halachah, right? So it's divided into sections, into chapters, subdivided into chapters, subdivided into halachot, individual halachot, Milah. So that's the chapter called Milah, right? Circumcision. Demi shalom mal atzmo, that if the person is uncircumcised and he doesn't see to it that he is circumcised, or as then mi sheyagdil over. Okay, once he grows up, when he becomes an adult, or in other words, if he doesn't do it once he becomes a bar mitzvah, right? Over bechol yom, every day he's considered to have transgressed a mitzvat aseh, on a positive commandment. So going around uncircumcised as an adult means you have transgressed every day. You are transgressing a positive mitzvah. Sorry, Judith. Yes, sorry. Yes.
Sorry, and I may have missed the discussion on this one. So let's say you have a parent who says, who just has you circumcised in the hospital, and you have not had a Brit Milah.
Correct.
Do you have to do chatafot dam Brit for that?
I believe you would, yes. I think you could do that, which is, thank God, way less of an issue than actually being circumcised as an adult. Yes. I'm saying this without the authority of a posek, but it just makes complete sense. And that counts. It fully counts, yes.
And then if your parents didn't circumcise you because they think it's a barbaric custom and they need to do it,
right.
Then if you want to become a more observant Jew,
right,
you need to go get circumcised as an adult.
Yes, you do. You go talk to your urologist. In one case that I'm aware of, I know where, I know of someone who converted as an adult and was uncircumcised and made the arrangements and took care of it.
Okay. I had a friend who he was 19. He was
Yes.
on I don't know if it was a submarine or a ship, but it was
Oh,
in
yes.
Alaska. And
Yes.
there was very limited water, and the guys were getting a lot of infections. And
Wow.
instead of going into town and getting a tattoo, 3 of them went into town and got circumcised.
Wow. What an interesting story.
Yeah,
God,
yeah.
interesting. Wow.
So that was my husband and I had long discussions on this.
Yes.
And the fact that this man said he liked it better afterwards was,
Well, isn't that interesting?
was reassuring.
It
You
is
know,
reassuring. Wow, because I would think it would be so painful. I would
no,
think.
afterwards, after it healed.
Uh, oh, okay. I didn't understand. I thought you was talking about the actual surgery. Okay, very good. Thank you for clarifying that. Yes,
Glad done so.
yes, yes.
So I found that reassuring because, usually it's one way or the other and you don't know the difference.
No,
Anyway, thank you.
thank you. Thank you for raising the halachic point there and also for sharing. That's great. Okay. So, all right, we just made this point about Maimonides, who's saying that just making this point that that this adult Jew who has not gotten circumcised is violating a positive commandment every day. Aval eino chayav karet. However, he is not deserving, I suppose we could say, or of karet ad sheyamut until he dies. So until the moment he dies, he is simply violating a positive commandment. But if he dies uncircumcised, is the point he's making, in that case, karet. Velochen dad harayvad, right? Abraham, I believe, ben David of Posquieres, I believe. The Rayvad is the interlocutor of the Rambam. And if you look at Mishnah, I don't know if it's pretty much all editions of the Mishnah Torah, they will have the Rayvad's disagreements with the Rambam in the text itself. There are little pieces where sort of it's cut out, the paragraph in a way is cut out for the Rayvad's words of he's cutting into the Rambam's thing. And I think that again just shows the attempt to be as honest and rigorous as we can about various opinions. And the Rayvad, as I said, constantly argues with the Rambam. Right? So anyway, guess what? It's not the opinion of the Rayvad. Surprise. Okay. Eli, what's his opinion? The bechol yom hu omed be'isur karet. He says, no. Every single day, as long as he is uncircumcised, he is violating the isur, the negative commandment of karet. That's going to involve karet. Isur karet means it's a negative commandment that carries the punishment of karet. Right. So this is clarifying the Rambam. Right. V'hamifashim, he'erichu bazeh, and the people who were commenting on both the Rayvad and Maimonides, they went into a lot of details. They said a lot about this distinction and this argument that the Rayvad has with the Rambam. Ulefela, he says, and it's amazing. Shelo heiru hamafarshim, that those who were commenting on this particular debate, right? They didn't make it clear de kedivrei harayvad, that according to the opinion of the Rayvad, katvu gam hatosafot, that in fact the Rayvad is in agreement, or should I say in this case, the Tosafot, remember Rashi's grandchildren, that are also on the page of the Gemara, of the Bavli, of the Babylonian Gemara, right, the Vilna edition, right? They also hold the opinion of the Rayvad. But Makot, where in Makot, it's in the Talmud, so Tractate Makot, page 14a. They don't mention it. All these commentators don't mention that the Ravad and the Tosafot are in agreement on this. V'ra'ui laha'ir, and it's worth mentioning, clarifying, Diladat HaRambam, that if you look at the Rambam, who's saying that the only moment when he actually would suffer the punishment of karet, right, nimtza, that at the end, in other words, that the point when he becomes to face karet, right, Nimsa kan, that in that statement we find remez nimratz, we find a compelling allusion, but Torah, in the Torah, lehasharat hanefesh, regarding the immortality of the soul, that the soul remains after death. In other words, if as long as he's alive, he isn't facing karet, and it's only after he dies that he faces karet, it's saying, well, he must be in existence to be facing karet after he dies. Okay? Let's see. Uschara ve'onsha, right? In other words, the fact that after you die, you either receive reward or punishment. Here we are. And because this is, at least according to the Rambam's understanding of the verse here, because the verse is mentioning karet here. That, because very often we say in the Torah, where does it say that there's immortality? It's not obvious. It's not obvious. I will tell you that fairly recently, maybe within a year or something like that, it occurred to me that all those laws about spiritual purity have directly to do it, that the Torah is absolutely assuming that there is life after death. And all those laws that seem so arcane, that involve ritual purity, right, Tuma and Tahara, have to do with immortality. They represent the Torah's concern about immortality of human beings. And again, following my sense of a general fundamental principle in the Torah, that this life is given to us to gain immortality. That if we live this life in the way that our Creator wants us to live it, God will grant us immortality. And the idea that there may be a lot of grace involved, etc., but nevertheless, it's up to us to gain it or not. So, anyway. Yan, and the reason, he's just going on with the proof here, right? Because since he is not going to receive this punishment of karet ad shiamut until he dies, harehu noseh avon, so clearly he is bearing this iniquity that is deserving of the punishment of karet, okay? La'achar mita, right? It's only after he's dead. That's when he has violated this mitzvah after he dies, that to the extent that he deserves karet. Ve'ien mashe katavnu la'el, and see what we wrote above, beparshat Noach, in the parsha of Noah, beparsha, where in the parsha that says, ve'ach et dimchen lenafshotechen edrosh, and this would mean, and even your blood according to your souls I will require. This has to do, of course, with someone who commits murder. Much more than that, I do not recollect myself. I would have to go back and look at our Torah Temimah there. And we will have to stop here until we next meet, until our next lesson. So I'll put in the little marker here, because apparently there's more to be said about this. Okay, there we are. Going to stop the share. So before we stop the recording, does anybody want to say anything for the record? Okay. Harlan?
I was just wondering about after death.
Yes.
Do we go to the world to come?
That is a very good question. there is some debate as to whether or not the world to come and immortality are one and the same.
Yes.
There are those who say that that we go to the world of souls after we die, that it's a different, in a sense, a different type of existence. All right. And there are those who say that the world to come has to do with the idea that someday what we would normally call the Messianic era would be a time when nations live together in harmony, where no one people abuses another people, and that there is this time of peace and prosperity and righteousness, that people acknowledge their creator, our creator, and that we all get along. And in a sense, that is what we pray for every day when we pray, along a major part of our prayers. And certainly the prayer Aleinu captures that notion, that particular notion. So it is a very valid question, Harlan, and one has to sort of leave it in that condition, I suppose.
Is there a book that describes all our world, what we live in? And there's a book that God has that when we die, it's in the book.
So when we're saying book, we're using that term metaphorically.
Yeah.
And I think the idea is that there is that this stuff doesn't disappear, that these things have permanent existence in whatever form it takes, but that it isn't just expunged. So that's why we use the term of book. I believe there's a Chinese proverb, if I can say it correctly, something to the effect that the weakest ink has more permanence than the strongest memory. So
Yeah.
this idea that whatever happens is for the record. So having said that, I will take us off the physical record here and end the recording. So